Hello, everyone. Welcome to Micah's Legislative Action Committee. Glad to have you on board on this beautiful Monday. At least in the middle of the state, it's a beautiful Monday. Started a minute late. I apologize for that. We're happy to get things underway. We're going to focus largely today on legislative activities at the federal level, but we're going to give you some updates on some things that are COVID specific that we want to make sure that you're paying attention to. Jason, why don't you go ahead and give us the regular housekeeping instructions for everybody that's on the call.
Thanks, Eric. So a couple of pointers for folks, whether you're a grizzled veteran or a newbie to GoToWebinar. If you are having any internet connection issues, either with the audio or the video, unfortunately, the best thing to do is log out and log back in. That is not something that we at the coalition have any control over. In terms of engaging with folks during the webinar, we got a couple of things to point out. There's a toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. If you click on the icon next to handouts, there you'll notice that there's a handout there. That is the PowerPoint slides for today's presentation. So everything that has the hyperlinks, like when we're talking about specific pieces of legislation, things like that, that is your ticket to be able to access that directly. So if that is the kind of thing that is your jam and you want to play along at home, then please download that handout to do so. And then last but not least, because of the size of these calls, our preference is to leave everybody muted. So if you have a comment, a question, any kind of feedback, or you want to engage with other members of the call, we ask that you use the questions box. So again, right-hand side of your screen, little icon next to questions. You click on that, you type in the thing, and then type in the question or statement, and then you hit send, and that is where we'll be monitoring all the feedback. So I think we are good to go. Eric, Laurel, can we move on?
And I apologize, I misspoke. I was talking about federal and state relating to COVID. That's really what we're focusing on during this call, is COVID at the state and federal level, not just federal activities. Sorry about that. Back on track. Laurel, over to you, or Jason, who's going up next?
I think I'll cover the COVID-19 resources and information. So we wanted to take a few minutes. We understand at this point that a fair number of folks are likely aware of the resources that are out there in regards to homelessness and COVID at the national level. But we wanted to make sure that folks are aware of some state level resources that we've got going on. So the first being the Michigan Campaign to End Homelessness website. That has some information that's been provided by DHHS and the CDC and HUD, as well as so it has a mix of federal and state level resources. It has links to relevant information. So we just want to make sure that folks know that it's there and that it's getting updated and that it's got information that's relevant to responding to the pandemic. And then the other thing that we want to make sure, in terms of kind of information going out to folks, that we want to make sure that folks are aware of, is the HMIS COVID-19 resources and information, and those are in the Learning Institute. So if that's something that you'd be interested in learning more about, strongly encourage you to reach out to the help desk for HMIS and ask to, if you don't already have an account created, ask them to help you with the process of getting something set up. Otherwise, if you, either you or somebody else at your agency already has access to the HMIS Learning Institute, I strongly recommend you log in and take a look at the resources and information that the team has put together and has made available. In terms of other resources that are out there that Mike has been managing, if you go to our homepage, www.mihomeless.org, we've got a calendar of, it started as trainings, but it's been slowly pivoting to other things. And when I say other things, I mean, like, we're now having, we're now populating sessions that like the National Low Income Housing Coalition or the National Alliance to End Homelessness, if they're having sessions about the CARES Act funding or other relevant funding, we're making sure that those sessions are getting onto the calendar. So now it's a mix of webinars and trainings, as well as those kind of informational sessions. So if folks are interested in taking part in that, you have everything in one handy calendar. And then last but not least is the COVID-19 response Facebook group that we are hosting. So we have the public Facebook page that basically anybody can access, but this is a private group. The link is there. So again, if you download the handouts, that's your surefire way to get access to it. And I think so far we've got about 70-ish people in the group, and there's been a little bit of banter about different things that are popping up across the state. So if you have specific questions or you want to reach out to your peers in other parts of the state and find out how they're responding to different parts of the pandemic, this would be a space where you could do that. So Laurel, I think I now turn things over to you unless there's questions, which there aren't any.
Yeah, no, I'm not seeing anything either. Thank you, Jason. We have some poll questions that we're going to ask. I think we're going to wait until after we go over the state and federal updates. But we want this to be a bit of a back and forth so that we understand how you guys are doing in your communities and what kind of advocacy needs you have as well. So Jason, if you'll help me with those poll questions after we do our federal updates, then we can get a sense of that. But first, let's go ahead and talk about our state and what's happening here in Michigan with regards to COVID and housing and homelessness. Back on March 30th, MICA submitted to the governor along a letter signed by over 80 organizations that asked for prioritization of homelessness and homelessness services within the state's response to COVID-19. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time to give an update about where we are with those specific asks. The link to the letter itself, or I believe our blog post about the letter with the text, is in the handout. But as a refresher, we asked for 5 different things to be prioritized by the state. The first being funding. And specifically, we were looking at housing resources through DHHS. Back in March, there was a supplemental budget passed, and we were asking for $1 million of that to go to DHHS to help with their programming. We learned later that they actually received $1.7 million. So that was something that they were working on trying to get as we submitted that letter. And we were glad to hear that they were able to receive that and a little bit more. Unfortunately, we know that there's a lot of unmet need in our communities with regards to funding to how we can respond to COVID. There's a lot of federal dollars that are going to be coming in. MSHDA just released their ESG NOFA last week. So if that's something that you participate in, you should have received that information. And I believe they're having a webinar, I want to say Wednesday, definitely this week, to go over that. So there are going to be dollars coming in, specifically dollars to help with things that you guys are doing on your front line. So hazard pay, hoteling, other things that are going to be directly impacting the services that you provide for those experiencing homelessness. But we know that there are going to be other budget issues that are going to be coming up. And unfortunately, we're hearing that as the state pivots to looking at their regular budget process, they're going to be very concerned with the deficit that we're going to be running due to all of the expenses that are popping up over responding to COVID. And so we've been having conversations with state legislators about where there's going to be room for us to be prioritizing either our existing priorities, so our ESP asked for a per diem increase or funding for diversion programming around the state. Those were things that we talked about with our state legislators back on our advocacy day in the middle of March. We're also talking to them about where there's room to bring in dollars for medium to long-term responses that we know we're going to be facing with rental assistance, and how we're going to be able to make sure that there is a pool of money that our folks can tap into to make sure that people aren't being evicted from their home once the eviction moratorium is lifted. And the bad news is that we're hearing that there's not a lot of room, that the focus is really going to be on trying to balance the deficit, making sure that we're filling in the absolutely most necessary pockets of funding. And that means that we're probably going to have to be looking to our federal level for any additional funding to come in to help either with the short-term immediate response and needs or the medium to long-term. That doesn't mean we're going to stop the conversation. We're going to continue to advocate for this and talk to our legislators on both sides of the aisle. If nothing else, educating them about this need and about all of the work that you guys are doing out in the field. So we're gonna keep having those conversations. But I think when we get to our federal updates, that's when the ask for additional dollars to be flowing through our state is really going to be important and the focus as we move forward. The second priority that we had in our letter to the governor was that we prioritize shelters and street outreach workers for PPE and other supplies. I don't have a big update on that, primarily because there's just been a lack of supplies and there's been a really decentralized way of trying to get that to the hands of folks who need it the most. And so I think that has improved a little bit. Jason, correct me if I'm wrong in terms of what we're hearing about people being able to access, but there has not been a huge push from the state to be able to get those into your hands.
Yeah, that's right, Laurel. So, I mean, the feedback we're hearing is kind of anecdotally from different parts of the state where there had historically been issues, that things have gotten better. But then again, I woke up this morning and was on social media and saw that some of our partners in the southeast part of the state are now doing donation drives for PPE. So it feels like it's kind of a rolling tide here in terms of there's supplies and then there's not. And I suspect that's going to be going on for a while yet.
Yeah, and I think that primarily that's the way the state's going to be responding moving forward is letting each community come up with those ways to raise the funds or do the donation drives to get those materials themselves. And that's unfortunate, but we all recognize that there's just a lack of supplies and the healthcare providers are going to be the priority. We'll continue to have those conversations for what they're worth, but at this point, I don't see a lot of room for us to try and get a centralized, strong response from the state on that. Our third priority was that as the governor released the Stay Home, Stay Safe order, we wanted to make sure there was clear guidance on how the local government and local police needed to be responding to those who were unsheltered. It took a little while, but THHS did release guidance just 2 weeks back, I believe, that followed the CDC guidelines about how our government and our police should be responding specifically to unsheltered, but also encampments in general. And the guidance is linked on the handout, but it does direct communities to not do encampment sweeps, which we're hearing is still happening. Is also strongly encouraging local law enforcement to be working with homeless service providers so that there's a strong partnership and there's good communications about the needs of those who are unsheltered and those who are staying in encampments. So we're glad that guidance has been issued. Unfortunately, it has not been issued through an executive order by the governor, and there's not really any hope of that happening. DHHS is continuing to put that out and working that in the hands of law enforcement and local government.
Hey,
and we'll
Laurel,
to do the same. Yeah.
your audio is starting to break up. It felt like it was getting better, but now it's starting to get worse again. We can still hear you, but you're sounding really muffled.
Okay, is that any better?
That's much better.
All right, I apologize. I'll scoot closer to the screen. And if it gets really bad, then I can try and use my phone. So let me know, Jason, if it
Yeah, much better whenever you're closer. Yeah.
Good, thanks. Jason, did you hear my update about the unsheltered, or do I need to go over that again?
No, you could understand. It was just a little muffled. It just wouldn't want to get the rest of the meeting like that.
Thank you. All right, so I think that's it for the unsheltered, except to just put out a plea. If you guys are hearing about communities or if you are in a community that's having issues with law enforcement, either targeting someone who is experiencing homelessness and unsheltered or targeting encampments, please do let us know. At this point, the best guidance we have is to use this document from DHHS as kind of a tool and to really beef up those relationships with your law enforcement and your emergency management offices as well within your counties. Our next item that we included for our state priorities to the governor was that we wanted the state to help identify additional spaces for sheltering individuals experiencing homelessness. We know that communities are really stepping up in a big way and finding those spaces either within individual shelters or in new spaces that they are dedicating to those experiencing homelessness. But we also know a lot of communities are putting their folks, either those who have tested positive or those who just need a private space, that you're using hotels and motels for that purpose. And so last Friday, the governor did put out a press release that we have secured an agreement with FEMA for hotel reimbursements up to 75%. And since that is so new, we don't have any details about it. We know that DHHS, again, will be putting out guidance on this, and we hope very soon. We're hearing maybe this week. And so that should provide more information about how you as a community can access that program and access those funds. But this is very good news because for a lot of communities, hotels are either the only or the best option as we're trying to navigate how we can get people into more permanent housing or how we can set up new facilities. And so we're hopeful that this is something that does create an additional opportunity for all of you as you're housing folks in the community. And then finally, we asked for an extended moratorium on evictions. We also asked to include utility shutoffs and foreclosures. And we targeted 90 days. Originally, the eviction moratorium was set to end May 1st. And then at the very last minute, it was extended through an executive order through May 15th. So again, that's good. The governor is listening that is a need for our state, but May 15th is coming up in just a week and a half or so. So we know that with her wanting to extend her state of emergency through the end of the month, things are not necessarily lining up in terms of the need of renters who may be facing eviction. It's not lining up with the way that the state is responding to COVID as a whole. And so we're going to continue to push for more extensions until we can get something more uniform from the federal government, or we can get a better plan for how the state can prevent eviction moving forward. And so that's good news, but we're going to continue working on it. I did link, there is a partnership that the state has put forward, the My Mortgage Relief Partnership, with regards to foreclosures. So that is, again, another tool with regards to foreclosures, but there's not additional information about that moving forward. And then finally, at the state legislative level, there are two new bills that have been introduced in the past week, House Bill 5720 and Senate Bill 87. And those are trying to extend the eviction moratorium through June 1st. So the state legislature is at least paying attention to this issue and wanting to extend it farther than the governor has. I have no information about what the likelihood of those passing or if there's any support. They are sponsored by Republicans, which is good news, but we'll have to see if there's any possibility of that moving forward. And again, June 1st is not that far away. So for the short-term concerns about evictions, there's some relief, not as much as we would like. So we are going to continue advocating for all of these things, as well as anything else that we learn about that is a priority from the communities, so that our governor and our state legislature knows that these are needs and that there are ways that we can be protecting and serving this population moving forward. And unless there are any questions, that's all that I have for the state update.
I did have something, Laurel. I just wanted to do a follow-up with respect to the state budget. I do think it's important for everybody to keep in mind the impact, not just today, but down the road with the respect to the revenues, the projections being down. One of the immediate things that we're seeing is the revenue sharing payments that the state provides to counties, cities, and townships has actually already been reduced. So I know that municipalities and counties are thinking in terms of a potential 15 to 25% cut in the upcoming year. So when we're looking at budgets being put together and resources being tightened at the local level, you'll need to be aware of that, because that may not impact as much today, but you'll be seeing that down the road as well. So you need to anticipate that and be thinking about how you're going to advocate at the county and local level with respect to making sure that resources are shored up for the services that you believe are necessary in your community.
Thanks, Eric. Any questions, Jason? I'm not seeing any on my end.
No, it is shockingly quiet.
I think a lot of this is old news for folks, so I'm not surprised. Let's get to some of the more timely and interesting things. Eric, can you talk to us about federal?
Sure. I think you said you wanted me to talk about what's happening at the federal level, but you were a little muffled, so I'll run with it. So yeah, a lot of work being done at the federal level still. As most of you know, the recovery funds that have been coming through Congress have been coming in phases. It's not all in one package. So the CARES Act was the latest round of some relatively robust funding, but there were some pieces that were missing from that, and so there's additional work being done. Congress is not showing its cards much based on their information through the National Low Income Housing Coalition, but the House is returning today. The intent was for them to actually be in session again today, so after taking some time away from DC. And what we're hearing is some discussions about how we can focus on resources for emergency needs, that is the area that we are trying to be pushing. We understand that we're not getting a lot of information about what those priorities are, but we do think that the Democratic side of Congress is looking more at family resources, but they're looking at elections, et cetera. Not really sure where housing falls in those priorities across the board. But what we're hearing about committees is that they are focused on immediate needs and not permanent resources or infrastructure. In the past, we've heard a little bit about infrastructure potentially being an investment made at the federal level, and within the last couple of years talked about infrastructure also including housing, but we don't see that as something that is high on the priority list. So what we are looking at and other national organizations are looking at is still a significant infusion into rental assistance. And so the National Low Income Housing Coalition is taking the lead on a focus that would relate to $100 billion in rental assistance. That's with a B, which is extremely important to note because it's absolutely well beyond what we would see allocated in a normal year, or maybe up to 10 years worth of funding that would be made available over a 3-year period. Also a focus on the eviction moratorium, thinking at the federal level that it's very important to be looking at preventing homelessness by standing up and saying that evictions are not going to be helpful for us now, that will cost us more in the long run. And then there's also discussion about additional ESG dollars that would be available as well. So when we look at the bills that are being put out there, I just wanted to cover a few of those. We've got those on the agenda, if I can get it. There we go. So bear with me just a moment here. So first of all, the Emergency Rental Assistance Act is probably the one that's going to get the most traction, and and we'll have the most discussion because it probably is the most significant in size and scope. And that has been introduced by Representative Denny Heck out of Washington State. In essence, it is the $100 billion for grants for housing assistance. Again, over a 3-year period, would be increasing the to I think 100%, 120% of the income threshold. So it's looking at giving more money and to more people over a multi-year period, which we think has a lot of merit to be looking for a longer term and not just trying to bridge for 6 months or a year, but 3 years worth. Again, that may have some traction at this point. The other bill is the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act of 2020. Omar Nohan has introduced that. Something that is not getting very much traction, but in essence, what it would do is provide, trying to make renters whole as well as mortgagers whole, so that they would not have to make payments. But then on the back end, landlords and the mortgage companies would get money from a federally funded relief fund. But again, that's not getting much traction. The Rental Eviction Moratorium Act of 2020 has been introduced by Jesus Garcia out of Illinois. And that is just simply a moratorium on evictions. It does not include any resources that would help to keep landlords whole. So those are just a few. Let's see. So the pending emergency rental assistance. I don't know what else that was referring to. Laurel, did you have something specifically in mind? because that I thought was tied to the Emergency Rental Assistance Act specifically. Was there something else there that I'm missing?
Yeah, this is a new bill that is going to be co-sponsored by Waters and HEC, and it is the $100 billion act. And I think it's going to be released this week.
Yeah, that's right. So that would be the $100 billion ESG, and that would be for 24 months. I don't know why that didn't pop out of my head, but it also includes $10 billion in sunsetting vouchers, meaning that they would not be on the books in perpetuity. They would be there available as long as a family would need it, but they wouldn't be renewable. So that's actually Maxine Waters and Sherrod Brown who are introducing that. So yeah, thank you for helping my brain get going on a Monday, Laurel. You're always good for that. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I don't see anything.
Eric, did you mention the call-in day?
I did mention the call-in day. I don't have my notes on that. It wasn't on the agenda, but right there you can see it on the screen on May 4th today. There is the number. So in essence, what we're talking about here is trying to raise awareness about the issue of resources for homelessness, and we want to make sure that it's on the radar screen of legislators. You know, our members of Congress, again, have a lot of competing interests. There are a lot of voices from subpopulations, different groups, lobbyists who are looking to get their piece of the pie. We want to make sure that we get our piece of the pie, and so we are encouraging folks to participate in the National Call-In Day. So you have an opportunity to talk about homelessness and affordable housing, and making sure that that is something that's included in the next package that they're working on currently. Any questions?
Jason, it looks like we did get a question about the call-in day. Should people be calling in at any time? This is an event hosted by the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And so the link that is, I think it's on here. If not, it's in the agenda that was sent out by email this morning. But the link will take you to additional information, including a sample script and some additional hashtags and social media posts if you choose to do it. They have the call-in number, and they also have a form email that you can access. So all you have to do is customize it and send it to your member of Congress. They're encouraging folks to do it all day long. So there's not a specific time that you should be doing it that I'm aware of. They just want to make sure that we are kind of flooding those offices throughout the day with information about why these priorities are important. And specifically with that bill that Eric mentioned that is being introduced this week, we want to make sure that we are asking for co-sponsors. I'm not aware of any Michigan co-sponsors right now, but we want to make sure that it is on front of our members of Congress and that they are aware of the opportunity. So no time to call in particular. Just make sure you either send an email or do the phone call, and use social media as well. You can tag our members of Congress on Twitter and Facebook as well. So there are multiple ways that you can get this in front of them today.
So Deb just asked if we have kind of the boiled down talking points that they might be able to share with their COC partners. Do we have anything from the NLHC, Laurel?
So the script does not have the data, but if we go to, and I can send this out in the follow-up, if you go to the NLHC site where they have their priorities listed, there is data there, and they've done a study on the $100 billion Rental Assistance Act that has a lot of data. With regards to our state in particular in the needs, I don't have any data specific to that I can put together quickly, but we can definitely get the NLHC priority list out to everybody, and that will have some talking points for you.
And that's an excellent point that you make, Laurel, about having data behind the request, because the $100 billion is not just pulled out of thin air, that they actually are looking at some numbers and projections, et cetera. So it is something that is based on what they think are realistic projections of what the need would be going forward. So that would be a good thing to be armed with.
Yeah, so we'll get that out to everybody, and I'll try to do it immediately after this call. I'm not seeing any other questions about the federal information. Jason, am I missing anything?
Nope, I think we're all caught up in terms of the questions or comments that have come in.
All right, so let's go ahead and kind of talk about what's happening from you guys. And again, Jason mentioned at the beginning of this call that this is a good time to send us messages. I think we have a small enough group, Jason, that if someone wants to raise their hand, we might be able to mute or unmute them and have them chat. But while people are collecting their thoughts, can we get those poll questions up, the second and third one, Jason, so we can have a sense of, we can collect some of our own data about what you guys are facing?
Okay, so yeah, and we'll actually keep these open for a little bit because give everybody a chance to process and respond in turn. So the first poll question that we're putting out there is about any issues you're encountering with accessing resources either for yourself or your clients. And this is one of those questions where you can select multiple responses, so you're not limited to just one response on this question. And like I said, given that it's not a one choice, we'll leave it open for maybe a minute and a half or so to give folks plenty of time to respond accordingly. But it looks like, wow, we did that. We do have a, so
yeah, I just want to clarify what the different items are.
Thanks, Laurel. Yeah, I saw that we have some questions coming in.
Yeah, so the first one, the PPE, personal protective equipment. The second one is the payroll loans that were on the second round that the federal government is putting out there. EIP is the economic impact payment, so the stimulus checks that are being deposited through IRS or sent by check. The fourth one is unemployment, and then obviously hotel and motel.
All right, and so thanks to those clarifications, I think I see lots of numbers shifting right now, so keep this open for maybe another 15 or 20 seconds, give folks plenty of chance to respond.
And if none of these are what you're facing, then please send us a note letting us know what else is out there. These are items that have come on our radar from what conversations we're part of at other states and hearing what other communities outside of Michigan are struggling with. And so we're just trying to get a sense of how we're doing here locally and if there are areas that we should be focusing our attention as we think about advocacy.
All right, so we got about a third of you responding, and the numbers kind of froze there for about 20 seconds. So I went ahead and closed the poll. So here are the results. 3/4 of the folks who responded said that they're having issues with getting access to PPE. Again, given the comments from earlier in the meeting, not that surprising. The PPP loans, 13%, 27%. The EIP for the clients, 60% unemployment, and then 40% hotel motel. Okay, thank you. So, I don't know why it keeps doing this. So, Laurel, should we go on to the third poll question?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So, do you want to give the context for the question?
Sure. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. This is the last one. You were able to choose as many as you wanted, and just the question was, what are you having trouble with? This one is, what is the greatest need for in your community? And so this kind of reflects some of what was in the last question, but some additional things as well. And full disclosure, a lot of this was stuff that we were hearing about in the subgrant RFP that we put out. We received a lot of applications that really spanned these categories. And so we're trying to get another sense from this group about what is the greatest need in your community. So you can only pick one this time.
Okay, lots of voting is happening. So I think we'll leave this one open for a similar amount of time as we did the last question. Give folks plenty of time to process and think through where their agency or their community is at right now in terms of needs.
And again, if there is something that's not reflected here that you're finding is the actual greatest need, send us a note. Let us know what it is. This is not the best forum for kind of getting an other category where people can fill in the blank. So send us a message on the chat or the questions and let us know what else you're facing.
Okay, I think we've capped out. We're at about 40% of y'all have responded. So we go ahead and close the poll and then webinar, and then share the results. So in terms of greatest needs, 6% said access for PPE, 18% said food, 29% said staff volunteer support, which includes hazard pay, 35% said shelter funding, such as hotels, rent, and security deposits, and 12% said tuck for remote work. So fairly, if I'm remembering correctly, a fairly comparable spread to what we saw in the RFP for the NLHC funds. Doesn't look like things changed a whole lot.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
So that's kind of it in terms of our structured way of collecting information from you guys. We've given you a couple minutes. Hopefully that gave you some time to think about anything else that you want to chat about. As I said, you can send it through the chat, or if you have something you want to talk about, we can, and you're someplace that doesn't have a lot of background noise, we can unmute you. But I'm not seeing anything come in. Does that sound right, Jason?
So far, nothing's come in. Oh, wait.
All right.
So I take that back. So Deb asked, we know that FEMA is available, but at the local level, communities may not know how to apply. And she doesn't have a microphone on her computer. So, I mean, this is part of the tech issues with working in our home offices now. Do we have anybody from DHHS on the call who might be able to respond to that? Or either Eric or Laurel, have you heard anything about how local communities are supposed to be tapping into the FEMA dollars?
No,
So,
I was gonna... Go ahead, Laura.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that I've not heard that. There was the press release that went out on Friday, but I have not seen anything follow up that provides any more details about that. Laurel, you may have a finger on the pulse elsewhere, though.
No, unfortunately, I don't want to call anyone out on the webinar who might be able to speak to this until they're prepared with the DHHS guidance. But I do believe they're putting something out that should answer that question. To clarify, I know that local communities are applying for FEMA, but this is, I think, in regards to the announcement on Friday about the hoteling dollars, correct?
Yeah, this was specifically for the decongregate housing.
Right. So yeah, I know that there is a disconnect between the state and the local. I think that is just a result of a global pandemic, as well as something that we're working on improving. So apologies that we don't have that now, but it should be coming soon. And then, Jason, I'm also seeing someone asking about the NLHC grants. And yes, you are correct. We missed our deadline of notifying everyone last Friday. That notice is going out today, or it should be going out today, letting folks know. We will go ahead and just say on this call, we received ask for over 20 times the financial amount that we had. And so it was a very long process. Some really hard decisions were made. But that information should be going out today.
Yes, that is the plan.
Okay, and I'm seeing the other comment kind of clarifying a little bit more about the FEMA dollars. Yeah, we hear you. There's a lot of frustration with trying to understand how this works. But I think we're having some folks say that they're going to look into it for us. And I'm not seeing anything else. Jason, are you?
No, I've been kind of bouncing back and forth between some of the comments and questions that have been coming in, but I think we've covered everything yeah, looks like we covered everything for right now.
Okay. Well, moving forward, as we've talked about, we're going to continue to advocate at the state and federal level for these things. But really, our information comes from you guys in terms of what the needs are and how things are going and where we need to be doing better. So do feel free to reach out. Let us know what's happening in your community and where the needs really are, because they shift. And it feels like every week there's something new that we need to be aware of and we need to be advocating for. So you have our contact information. Let us know where things are at and what we can be doing to help you further. And I'll make sure that this information, this webinar recording and the PowerPoint and some of that additional NLIHC information for today's call-in day gets out to everybody as soon as possible. Thanks for everything you guys are doing. Eric, Jason, any last words?
No, keep up the great work. I know it's difficult circumstances, but if we're all working together and we know what our needs are and we can advocate for one another, we're going to be able to get through this.
Thanks, everyone. We will see you next month.
Thanks, everybody.
Sure.